Today, we have another edition of the Meehan Mission Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Meehan, and we have the honor of talking to Dr. David Brownstein. He is out of the state of Michigan. Go Wolverines, like he will say. And he is a holistic, integrative provider who is one of the rarities in the medical community because he is a critical thinker. Now, Dr. Brownstein has authored over 17 books. We've covered a couple of his topics, and today we are covering his book, The Statin Disaster. So sit back, take some notes, and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to another edition of the Meehan Mission Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Meehan, and today my special guest is the wonderful, brilliant Dr. David Brownstein. And Dr. Brownstein, I am just so flattered that you like to come on our show and help educate our audience because you are full of a wealth of knowledge. And really what I wanted to talk about today, so that we get to the point, is your book, The Statin Disaster. And I will make sure that we have links to this down in our description and everything. But I really wanted your take on what is going on in the medical world when it comes to statins. And not only that, we might even have to back it up a little bit, is like, why are physicians even actually prescribing statins? So can you just take it from there?
I'm happy to be here. And of course, so I write my books. I've written 17 books, and I write my books for one of two reasons. Either I'm annoyed about something or I'm excited about something. And that statin book was an annoyance book that I was just, once I started looking at physiology and biochemistry and looking at the pathway of where statins work in the human body and seeing the enzyme that they blocked, which is called HMG-CoA reductase, and seeing downstream what happens when you block that enzyme, there's just no way on this earth that we were properly designed by our maker, whoever designed us, that to block that enzyme and expect a good long-term result. It's just literally impossible, because statins work by poisoning that enzyme, as I said, HMG-CoA reductase, and it's the rate-limiting enzyme for making cholesterol. So if your goal is to lower cholesterol, statins are the perfect thing to do that, because they do that. And however, downstream from cholesterol are all the adrenal hormones and sex hormones, such as DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. And, you know, I got started in holistic medicine 35 years ago, from treating my dad, who was suffering from severe heart disease. He had his first heart attack at 40, his second heart attack at 42. He had a couple of angioplasties and bypass surgeries over the next 20 years. And when I finished my residency, my dad was suffering from continual angina for 20 years, popping nitroglycerin pills like they were candies, and looked pale and pasty, and we were going to die at any moment. Just I was waiting for the phone call. So I was practicing conventional medicine. I didn't know anything holistically. I wasn't interested in anything holistically. I used to tell people, don't take anything that I wasn't taught in med school, which, of course, the only thing I was taught in med school were drugs and how to diagnose pathology and how to prescribe a drug to treat that. So here I was out of medical school, out of residency, waiting for the phone call. My dad died. I was about 6 months into practice, and I went into medicine to be a conventional family doctor. I didn't grow up in a household taking anything alternative, and we didn't take a vitamin. We didn't question anything in medicine. We went to the doctor when we were sick. We took whatever they told us to take, and that was how I grew up. And I started practicing medicine that way. And around 6 months into that, all of a sudden I get this anxiety bubbling up out of nowhere. I lose sleep for a couple of nights, and I'm getting ready to go to work, and I blurt out to my wife, Allison, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. And she met me at 18, met me at orientation at the University of Michigan, the winningest college football team in
Go
the history of college
Wolverines.
football. I had no plan B from when I met her. Plan A was to be a doctor and be a family doctor, and then there was no backup. So I blurted out to her, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. And I'd never said anything like this to her before. I was happy. I was happy in my residency. Maybe not happy all through med school, but I was happy through the clinical part of med school. And she said, what's wrong? And, remember at that time, we had $100,000 in student loans. That was back then, 35 years ago. I said, I'm not helping people. They're just prescribing drugs to treat, mostly not treating the underlying cause of their problem, treat their symptoms, and more drugs to treat the problems than the first drugs. So she said, what are you going to do about it? I'm like, I don't know. And so the short version of the story was I met this chiropractor right then as a referral from a patient of mine who bothered me to meet a chiropractor. Now, before that, I never referred to him. I never talked to him. I used to tell people don't go to them because they were dangerous, even though I didn't know what they did. But the chiropractor that I met was Dr. Robert Radke, and he was doing functional biochemistry. And he was looking at these biochemical pathways and seeing what inhibits them, what stimulates them, or what supports them. And with the idea that if we support the human biochemistry, the body's pretty well designed. We're designed to take care of itself. We're designed to take care of ourselves pretty darn well through an entire lifetime, including old age. So it was a new way of thinking. He brought me a book, Healing with Nutrition by Jonathan Wright, an allopathic physician. I read that book till the middle of the night. I woke up the next morning. I still haven't slept for now, another night, but I was excited now. And I called my dad in the office and I said, hey, I want to do 2 blood tests on you. And I checked his thyroid levels and his testosterone levels based on what I read in that book and what I talked about with Dr. Radke. And my dad was on 12 medications to control diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, and heart disease. And he looked awful, as I said, and I was ready, for the call that he died. So I draw those blood tests, and his testosterone levels come back below detectable limits. His thyroid levels come back in the lower part of the reference range. And I put him on 2 things. I put him on natural thyroid hormone and natural testosterone. Within 7 days, his angina went away, which was continual for 20 years. He started to look better, act better. He didn't have chest pain anymore. He could start to do things. Within 30 days, his cholesterol fell below 200 without changing any of his bad habits. I quickly got him off his medications. Now that was before statins. There were other cholesterol medications. And his cholesterol stayed below 200, even though my dad ate terribly and didn't take care of himself. And it's because we balanced his hormonal system. And I ended up looking at that biochemical pathway of cholesterol and downstream metabolites from cholesterol, including DHA, pregnenolone, testosterone, progesterone. Put my dad on all these hormones, and his cholesterol came down. So my biochemical evaluation of my dad was his hormones were all screwed up, causing this heart disease problem, and his body was well designed to make hormones, yet they weren't working. So his body was funneling cholesterol to try and make these hormones, but there was a bottleneck up there. Now the bottleneck was being made worse by the cholesterol lowering medications his doctors put him on, but he was lacking thyroid hormone, which is crucial to making all these other hormones. He was lacking vitamin A, B vitamins, and he was lacking iodine, which is crucial to making all these hormones. Once I got him biochemically resettled, his hormone levels settled down. His cholesterol never went above 200, even though he never ate well, much to my consternation. He lived out his life without having chest pain again. And when I saw the changes in my dad, that first 30 days, really, I decided I'm going to do holistic medicine. So I decide every patient's going to get a hormonal and nutritional evaluation, and every patient gets a full thyroid and adrenal hormonal evaluation, just like I did on my dad. So the first, I start diagnosing all these people with hormonal imbalances and thyroid imbalances and treating people with small amounts of these hormones, and everything was fine. And statins come on the market.
Yeah, a huge market, isn't it? Now, I've heard statins are a miracle drug, right? And that's why it's like one of the most profitable for big pharma, and we're talking about in the billions of dollars. Isn't it a miracle drug?
It is the most profitable drug class in the history of big pharma. over 40% of American adults are on statins right now, and I think the drug should be banned. I don't think anyone should be on them.
Right.
So here I was rebalancing people's hormonal systems. Their cholesterol's coming down naturally, and I don't find any reason for statin drugs. Cholesterol is a necessary substance for the human body. It has anti-inflammatory effects. It protects nervous tissue and central nervous tissue. It has antibacterial and antiviral effects. So why would you want to poison the enzyme that's making this crucial substance for our bodies? So I see these statin ads come out. And the big ad that came out in the 1990s was by Robert Jarvik, who was the inventor of the artificial heart. He was a dentist, and his picture was on these ads saying, Lipitor lowers the risk of heart disease by 36%. So heart disease has been our number one killer for 75 years or so. It's still our number one killer, even though 40% of American adults are taking the medication that supposedly treats it, even though it treats a surrogate marker, cholesterol. It doesn't treat heart disease very well. And these ads come out. Now, I had realized quickly, you don't want to poison this pathway. It's going to be fraught with problems, just like my dad was having problems. So I asked myself, how does Lipitor lower the risk of heart disease by 36%? It can't. It biochemically can't.
I mean, written by a pharma company? It had to be written by big pharma. I mean, let's look at who's writing these things.
I have the ad in my book, the picture of it. And I have the study, I go through the study in my book. And when I lecture to doctors, I take my time and go through this study and show them how they did this and how they still do it today. They still do the same mechanisms today. So I'm looking at this ad, 36%. I'm like, hey, it's our number one killer. You lower the risk 36%. That's a big deal. But it can't be true. So how did they do it? That's what I was asking myself.
Yeah. How did they manipulate the numbers to show what they wanted to show, really?
So to go to med school, to get into med school, you have to take statistics in undergrad. I got an A at the University of Michigan, 4-0 against Ohio State, soon to be 5-0. I went to med school in Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit. I took the same class, basically the same stats class. I got an A. I'm generally pretty good with numbers. I've been like that my whole life, and I thought I knew statistics. When you're in the second part of medical school and in your residency, you go to these journal clubs where you're supposed to review these articles, and you decide whether it's a good article or not a good article, and how much weight do you put on the article. And you what I realize now is, when you went through these articles with the older residents and older doctors who I thought were so much smarter than me, nobody knew how to read an article. I can tell you now, 99% of doctors don't know how to read articles. They don't know. They don't, because they're enumerate with statistics. They don't know how to look at statistics, see what big pharma is doing, and to come up with their own numbers so they can evaluate whether the drug is actually effective or not, or whether the drug is actually safe or not. So 36% was sticking in my craw. And I'm looking at this study. Study was in, I believe, in JAMA, a very reputable journal, one of the top 3 journals. And, I got 2 A's in statistics at 2 pretty good schools. And I can't do it. So I buy a book, Statistics for Dummies, and I start looking. Now, this is before the internet, so maybe the internet had started. I don't think I used the internet back then. And I stared at that article for about 30 days until I got my aha moment. And my aha moment was that the drug companies use this term called relative risk. And the 36% number was a relative risk. So they used the same numbers for the COVID vaccines when they said 95% reduction in COVID if you took Pfizer's drug.
Right.
And everyone went on TV, including both presidents saying, 95%, and whatever. We all lived through that. They did the same thing. So relative risk is a statistical term that is utilized by big pharma to make poorly performing drug or therapies look better than it actually is. So if we do now, if I had this would be better in person, and I had a paper, and I was talking to a group, and I do this to lay people, and I do this to doctors. But if we did our study of, let's say we have 100 people taking drug X to drug X is supposed to lower your risk for heart attacks.
Okay.
So we have 100 people taking a placebo, a true placebo with no effect on the body, and 100 people taking drug X. And 2 people who take the placebo get a heart attack, and 1 person from drug X gets a heart attack. So if you do 1 out of 100 in the drug X group, that's 1% got a heart attack. 2 out of 100, 2% in the in the placebo group got a heart attack. Relative risk is figuring out by putting 1% over 2%, and you come up with 0.5. The media headlines read 50% reduction in heart attacks because 1 got it out of 100 versus 2 in the placebo group.
Right.
So,
well, I just want to say, but the pharmaceutical industry is relying on the fact that physicians don't know how to read medical literature. And
physicians are innumerate.
That's where you are a critical thinker. My husband, Jim, was a critical thinker. If anybody presented a study to him, he went through it. I mean, who is it written by? Who's, the lead author? What type of financial bias do they have? And I think that's one of our biggest crutches in the Western medical community is there's not enough people like you that are critical thinkers.
Your husband and I did go through a few articles together, particularly a few vaccine articles together, just like this, on a split screen. And he was fantastic at it. I will tell you 99% of physicians, in my opinion, are innumerate. They don't understand these numbers.
I agree.
They buy into this 95% benefit of Pfizer's, preventing COVID. So you have a 95% chance of not getting it, which is not true. It was actually 0.8%. But anyway,
right.
So we got this 1% over 2%. So the media headlines read 50% reduction in this drug X group. Now, if we do the same study with 1,000 people in each group, 2 of them get a heart attack in the placebo group. 1 gets a heart attack in the drug X group. We get 0.1% over 0.2%. Still, the number comes out to 0.1 over 0.2 or 1 over 2 again. It's 50% reduction in heart attacks with drug X. Now, if we do 10,000 people and 1 and 2 get it, it's still 50% reduction. If we do 1 million people and 1 and 2 get a heart attack, the headlines read the same, 50% reduction with drug X. However, think about it. 100 people took drug X, 1 got a heart attack. 100 people took the placebo group, 2 got a heart attack. The absolute difference in risk, which is a much more accurate number, is 2% minus 1%. It's 1% difference between the 2 groups, meaning you have to treat 100 people to get that benefit of 1 drug. That means 99% of people failed it. And if we move to 1,000 where it's 0.1 and 0.2%, now it's 99.9% failure rate because 999 failed the drug, only 1 out of 1,000. If we do 10,000, it's now a 99.99% failure rate because 1 out of 10,000 benefited, the other 9,999 didn't benefit, and so on and so on and so on. Now, the FDA has evaluated this, and and I have the slides for this when I lecture about it. And I have this cool lecture I give to both doctors and lay people on stats. And the FDA says doctors should not be relying on relative risk numbers to describe therapies to patients because it inordinately makes a poorly performing drug or therapy look better than it actually is. Doctors should be relying on absolute risk differences and number needed to treat, such as I said, the number needed to treat would be 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, depending on how many were in the study. So yet the media headlines read 50% each time. So if we go back to that original Statin study, which said 36% lowered risk of heart disease if you take Lipitor, how did they get that? Well, what they found was 3% in the placebo group got a heart attack, 2% in the treatment group got a heart attack if we took Lipitor. Well, 2% over 3% is 66. It's 2/3.
2/3.
And if you subtract 1 from that, you get a 34%. They rounded the numbers up. 34% reduction in heart attacks. However, the absolute risk difference is still 3% minus 2%. It's a 1% absolute risk difference, which means there's a third term called number needed to treat. You put 1 over that number, but it means that there's you have to treat 100 people for 3.3 years, the length of that study, the Jarvik study, to prevent 1 heart attack. Now, that was in 1990,
Oh my gosh.
maybe 1998. Here we are 30 years later, close to 30 years later. There is not a statin study that shows better than 1% reduction in non-fatal heart attacks for primary prevention, meaning a healthy person hasn't had a stroke or heart attack. They're trying to prevent their first one. What that means, so the patients are told, when the patients are seeing a doctor who's a numerate with statistics, they're saying you have a 30 to 50% reduction in heart attacks if you take this statin drug, based on all the studies. Because all the studies show the same
They're
thing.
going to take it. They're going to.
But
I see why you wrote this book.
Yes, and I go through that in this book.
It's infuriating.
It is. Well, that's why I was.
It is. It's infuriating. Yeah.
I was infuriated. I was going to use a stronger word.
Yeah.
But so this here's the other thing, and then we can talk.
Yeah.
So statins are given for two reasons: primary prevention, meaning you haven't had a stroke or heart attack, you're trying to prevent your first one. Every statin study out there, I don't think there's one. They're about 1% reduction in non-fatal strokes or heart attacks if you take a statin for 3 to 5 years. That's it. That means they fail 99% who take them, basically.
Right.
The secondary prevention means you've had a stroke or a heart attack. You're trying to prevent another one, or your third or your fourth. It doesn't matter how many you've had. You're trying to prevent another one. You've already had a cardiac event. They're about 3% effective in that category of people, meaning, in other words, they're 97% unfavorable, not effective. So you might say, you might say to yourself, well, I'll take the 1% benefit. Okay, fine. At least now you know the numbers. But I would say the 1% benefit you might say okay with if it was something like vitamin C. Let's say vitamin C has a 1% absolute risk reduction in non-fatal strokes or heart attacks. And I'm just making up these numbers for vitamin C.
Disclaimer.
But vitamin C, what are the side effects from vitamin C? You get diarrhea if you take too much of it.
Yeah.
There's other effects from vitamin C in helping wound healing and helping your immune system and helping your hormonal system and whatever else vitamin C does on the body. Not too many bad effects. What are the bad effects of statins? There's myalgias, muscle aches and pains. There's liver problems. There's neurologic problems. There's Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia that have been associated with statins, long-term use of statins. Those are a big deal for a 1 to 3% benefit. So,
yeah, I've seen the list. I mean, damage to muscle fibers. I mean, there's just the brain damage, or if you want amnesia, all of these things that are listed for adverse effects. It's like, risks, benefits, and alternatives, people. So, and that's what I just find so disheartening, that patients are prescribed statins and they're not told the whole story.
They're prescribed statin, but what's really irritating is, so they're prescribed statins, but they're not given usually they're not given very much talk on diet or exercise. They're given zero talk on hormonal balance because, like in my dad's case, cholesterol's up here trying to get down this funnel, and it's plugged up because he's lacking vitamin A, he's lacking thyroid hormone, he's lacking iodine, and some other vitamins and minerals. Once you open up that funnel, the hormones can start being made, and cholesterol comes down naturally. That's what I found in doing this practice. Years ago, Kathy, I saw a med student. So when med students come rotate with me, med students are residents, the first day they come in, they get an article. I used to give them that JAMA article we just talked about. Okay. But there's a more recent article from 2002 that gave statins primary care prevention, where they could give it to healthy people to try and prevent their first stroke or heart attack. And what that article came out with a 50% reduction in non-fatal strokes or heart attacks if you took a statin for 1.9 years. That was how long that study was. And this study, when it came out, made headlines across the country. I'm good at the research articles and I'm good at statistics. I can really evaluate an article in a minute or so because I know how to calculate these absolute risk differences and number needed to treat and stuff. So I calculated that number. That 50% was actually 0.8%. That was the benefit of that study.
Wow.
So I give medical students and residents this article and I say, I want to know how effective this drug is. So I hand it to them. Out of 30 plus years of doing this to medical students and residents, one got it right the first time. They all come back and say it's 50% effective because they read the abstract. That's all doctors generally read. And they read whatever it says there. They just kind of pare it back. So I said, is that it? Well, so they come back to me and they say, well, it's 50% reduction. I said, oh, is that an absolute risk reduction or a relative risk reduction? I don't know. Do you know what the difference is? No.
No.
So I spend the next 30 days teaching them.
Good.
And I go through it step by step. And I tell them the first day they come in, my goal is by the end of 30 days here, the first thing I want you to learn is how to read a research study and be able to calculate relative risk, absolute risk, number needed to treat on your own, not what's in the article, because many times those numbers are wrong anyways that they calculate. So, and they could do it by the end of 30 days. Everybody can do it.
That is great.
So I have a med student, and she's going through it with me. And it comes near the end, and she, the light clicks on somewhere between weeks 3 and 4 in these people. It's about the same in everybody. So we go through this article. It clicks. It's not 50%. It's 0.8%. Just like the Pfizer vaccine, 95%. I get the article and I look at it. It's not 95%. It's 0.8%. This is garbage. And so she says to me, I just wasted 4 years of my life. I don't want to be a doctor anymore.
Oh,
and I said, wait a minute.
Did you convert her?
I said, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Medicine's wonderful. It's been the best thing in my life. It was a calling. It's still a calling. I wouldn't change anything. And I said, whether you practice holistic medicine or conventional medicine is still good if it's practiced the right way.
Right. There is a need for it. Absolutely.
Of course there's a need for it. Absolutely. There's a need for drugs. There's a need for surgeries. And there's a need for chemo and radiation at times too. But I said, what's needed is you to be able to read these studies so you can tell your patients whether it's vitamin C or whether it's Lipitor, whether, what are my benefits and what are my risks of doing this drug? So I settled her down and, she left. So I wrote this blog post and I titled it, I Talked the Medical Student Off the Cliff. And I wrote her story. Good. So I get a private email back from a cardiologist in my area who bills himself as a holistic cardiologist. And he says, you're wrong. Call the medical student back. That article was, and I talked to her about that second article. That was a 50% reduction in strokes and heart attacks. And I typed, so we start going back and forth through private emails. I said, no, that's a relative risk. Here's what the FDA says about relative risk numbers. Here's the absolute risk difference. Here's the number needed to treat. And it's 0.8%. And I do the calculations for him. So then he sends me a note back and says, well, what about this study? Like 40%, whatever it said, another one.
Right.
I go through the numbers and they're all the same. They're all, the numbers are the same for 35 years. So we go back and forth 10 times. After the 8th time, and they were all pleasant. There was no name calling. It was all professional. It was fine.
Which is how it should be. That's literally how it should be. Discussion.
He was a gentleman. I was a gentleman. So after the 8th, and we're friendly with each other. We might not agree on it. We don't agree on everything, but we're still friendly with each other and we still respect each other. So after the 8th time, I was telling Allison about it, and we'd eat dinner, and I'd say, "Oh, he emailed me again. Same number, same study, doesn't matter." So I would do and I spell out every calculation below. Every one of my emails had all the calculations how I was doing it, and she said, "Why are you bothering? He's not going to agree with you." I said, "Because he's going to agree statins are 1% effective." Then I stopped. So the 10th email came. I did it again. He sends me a note back, says, I give up. You're right. It's 1% effective. I am willing to hope my patients in that 1% category. If it's a primary prevention, and 3% category if it's a secondary prevention. And I said, okay, fine, then I'm done. So at least now you can tell your patients, hey, there's a 1% chance you take this drug that could poison your liver, poison your brain, cause Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. 99% chance it doesn't help you. Who the hell's going to take the drug when you tell them that?
Right. And that's the corruption in the pharmaceutical world. I mean, I was a drug rep, and I would go to the physician's office, and I had this little slick that said, here's your symptoms, here's the study, prescribe this. And then I would go. I mean, we didn't want critical thinkers. We didn't want the doctor. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I mean, I did that. And,
it's funny. It's funny, Kathy. I used to have drug reps come to me when I was a conventional doctor. Then I started flipping this holistic stuff. They still came for a little bit. And then I learned about these statistics. So they'd come with their charts. And I'm like, are those absolute risk numbers or relative risk numbers? And they got this look on their face like they don't want to talk about that, and they stopped coming. Immediately stopped coming after that, and then they don't come anymore.
Well, we don't allow drug reps in our office. Jim would let them leave studies behind if they wanted to leave their studies, and then he would go through them. But other than that, we just kind of. But and you hit upon it when you talked about nutrition. Going back to your basic nutrition for these patients. And if you really just kind of, clean up their system and help get all the toxins out and everything, because, our bodies are built to repair.
So when you get toxins in you, one of the body's mechanisms to counter, look, mercury and aluminum and lead poison hundreds, if not thousands of enzymes in the body. They poison cells. You can die from overexposure to any of those three substances. One of the body's first defense mechanisms against that is to produce more cholesterol as a buffering effect, particularly for the central nervous system, to protect it. And what's the worst thing you want to do in that case is block cholesterol production. What you want to do is figure out what the underlying cause is of why cholesterol is elevated. Is it a crappy diet? Is it mercury? Is it lead? Is it aluminum? Is it something else? And do you need to detoxify? Do you need to eat better? Do you need to, is it lack of thyroid hormone? Because lack of thyroid hormone and elevated cholesterol has been written about for over 100 years in conventional medicine. Yet there's not a cardiologist out there that takes thyroid levels, and when they see a patient with elevated cholesterol, they're just too busy prescribing statin drugs. And now worse drugs, such as PCSK9 inhibitors and, these terrible drugs that just totally deplete the system of cholesterol. And, it's frustrating, but this is really one of my favorite subjects to lecture to people on, just because when I have a board and I'm doing the calculations out for them slowly, you see the light go on in their face, and that once you learn this, when Pfizer comes out and says this new gene modifying therapy we're going to mislabel a vaccine is 95% effective, and the president of the United States is going to go on TV and both presidents are going to go on TV.
They took what they were fed and regurgitated
the outgoing president at that time and the incoming president at that time went on TV and told us you all need to get vaccinated, and especially the Biden presidency when he's lecturing us that we're responsible, whatever, all his nonsense.
Yeah.
And what did 95% mean? Did it mean you have a 95% less chance of getting COVID and if you take the vaccine? Did it mean you have a 95% less chance of hospitalization and death? No. What that 95% chance really meant was you have a 0.8% less chance of getting a mild to moderate case of COVID over a few months because it wore off after that. No change in hospitalization, no change in death, no change in being really sick with it. That's what that 95% chance meant. And what did we get out of that? We got 70% of our country vaccinated with a new gene-modifying therapy that we'll see what happens because it's such a new therapy. And I can tell you, I've seen what happens, and it ain't pretty.
No,
and that better stop. And as you mentioned at the beginning of this, the problem is doctors are innumerate with statistics. They don't know how to read a research study. They let big pharma bamboozle them, and they let the pretty drug reps come in their office. Look, they used to come to my office. They were nice looking. They were smart. They could talk the talk, and they talked. Look, I didn't question them much because I thought they knew more than I did about the drug.
About that particular, I know. I'm sorry. I'm guilty. But hey, I do want to touch on where we have instances of, patients that are trying to do more natural, holistic, just less big pharma, that kind of thing. But they'll come to us and they'll say, my cardiologist put me on a statin, and what would a typical patient person say if they know, they've watched you, they've read the book, they know that statins are not actually that good for them? What would you do in that case when you've got this specialist cardiologist saying you're going to be on a statin, by the way, you're going to be on the statin for the rest of your life? Yep. Any suggestions there on how to approach that?
So the suggestion is as I said earlier, I write my books for two reasons. One is I'm irritated or I'm excited about something. Statin book was irritation, although I guess there was some excitement because I finally figured out statistics and how to be able to properly read a research study, even though I had 7 years of training and I couldn't do it. And when I look back on it, my preceptors and my attendings and my older doctors, they didn't know how to read it either. They didn't know what they were doing either. But so my suggestion is, number one, educate yourself. That's why I wrote that book. Number two, what I tell my patients is if they haven't had a stroke or heart attack, you got a 1% benefit from that drug. I go through the numbers just like I went through with you. If they had one, I'd say you got a 3% benefit, meaning you have a 99 to 97% chance the drug ain't going to help you. Here are some of the side effects. What do you want to do? And I let them I give them the data, let them make their decision with it. And I have a few that are willing to assume that they're in that category and they'll take it, or they're scared. One of the ways conventional medicine works, they scare you to death.
They're very intimidating.
You don't get this COVID vaccine, you're going to die. You're going to die a terrible death. You're going to die of suffocation. And
we get that with the childhood vaccination schedules. They're just intimidated.
So they scare you, and But what the best antidote for that fear is education.
I agree. Yep.
Once you get that education, you realize it ain't 95%. It's 0.8%. It ain't 36% for Lipitor. It's 1%. And
good.
Am I going to take this 1% when I look at these side effects? No, I'm not going to do that. I don't know what you're going to do. And when the COVID vaccine came out and I got that study and I saw 0.8%, I'm like, I'm not taking that thing. And was I scared?
I
was scared at the beginning.
Had they known, they wouldn't have taken it. They wouldn't have taken it.
But they were scared. They were given misinformation and disinformation by the powers that be, all the way up to the top of our government. And both.
It's irritating. But I was going to say, not only is knowledge power, but, and I was just thinking about, because a lot of times what we recommend for parents, not to go into a pediatrician's office by themselves, because that's when they really feel a lot of intimidation by the pediatrician and the staff and stuff. I think I'm going to say that to any patient that's going into their cardiologist office. Don't go in by yourself. Number one, arm yourself with knowledge, and then bring somebody else in there with you, just so that you've got that support person. And I think that, the white coat is probably going to be maybe a little less aggressive in their response to you when you actually talk about statins and want to know the actual risk and what are adverse events and things like that. So I'd probably add a person.
I think that's really good advice that I have not done. And you know what? I'm going to start suggesting that. I think that's really sage advice. And the other thing I tell my patients is, look, we're all trying to help. I really don't think doctors are bad people. I think they may be innumerate and they can't read an article to say, to properly do their job. But no one's looking, as far as I know, nobody's looking to harm anybody. And
intentionally. I agree. I don't think it's intentional. No. I think there's
that cardiologist I was in that statin debate on.
Yeah.
He's not going to harm anybody. He's looking to help people. And we disagree. There's no disagreement in medicine, then medicine ain't moving forward, man.
True. Right.
There should always,
the science is not settled.
No. And so I think that it's good advice to have someone with you. It's also good advice to have, as part of your healthcare team, a doctor that is just on your side here and that you can bounce things off of. I have patients call me all the time or email me, hey, my doctor wants me to take this drug. What do you think? Because you don't know. And especially in our busy lives, who's got time to calculate out number needed to treat and absolute risk reduction? And, these medical words are technical jargon that people don't understand. But, I wrote that book so people can understand it. It is not written so nobody, and that book was written a few years ago. It is still apropos today. The new studies are the same as the old studies. Human biochemistry doesn't change. You poison that enzyme. Here's the consequences of doing that. Here's the positives of doing that. And that's just how it's going to be. So if you don't have a medical background, find a doctor who's on your side and who, I refer to cardiologists. I refer to conventional cardiologists. I refer to conventional surgeons and oncologists because you need them. And they serve a purpose. But I think that we can work together and lessen the use of synthetic drugs that are poisoning enzymes and blocking things in the body that are just not healthy for long-term goals on people. They might be healthy. Healthy is not the right word. They might be helpful in times of acute crises. But really, we should be working to support the human physiology and biochemistry. It was put there for a reason. It was put there to give us health and wellness into old age. The reliance on these drugs like statins that 40% of Americans are on, I don't, we take more drugs than any people on the face of the earth. Are we the healthiest?
No.
We're the worst of all the Western countries.
Not even close to healthy.
Our kids take more vaccines than any other kids on the face of the earth. Are our kids the healthiest?
No.
Our kids are the worst compared to every Western country out there. We got a mess on our hands, and it's time for people. You're going to have to take some stance here, and you're going to have to educate. You have to educate yourself a little bit, and you have to find advocates for you. And I agree with you. I think that's a great advice about really taking someone with you when you go to an important visit, and just having another set of ears there.
Yeah, definitely have it's power in numbers. It really is. There's powers in numbers. So, question: is there any last, final, great advice, general advice when it comes to your patients' health and people in general, whether they're looking at cholesterol numbers or just anything? Where do you start?
So, start with someone who's on your side. Who's looking out for you, and that when I'm in the room with a patient, I don't have my phone with me. The only time I have my phone is if I'm expecting a doctor call. There's two reasons I have my phone. I'm expecting a doctor call about another patient, or I got a sick family member that I'm worried about. Otherwise, I don't have my phone with me. So if there shouldn't be a phone with them, there shouldn't be a computer between us. There should be just eyes looking at each other and, full concentration and full thought between the two. And my suggestion is, if you're not feeling well, don't settle for subpar health. If you feel like your healthcare person isn't really on the same page as you, or isn't really giving you the right advice, then search around. There's others out there. There's enough holistic doctors out there, and there's more of them now.
Yes.
And they are out there. The ones I'm associated with are all nice guys and gals, and they work hard, and they should be able to look at things that support your physiology and biochemistry and teach you how best to do that. And we're out there. Might take a little searching to find us, but it can really serve a purpose. And I could tell you, as I know families and I know people, makes me a better doctor, makes me a better person, and I think that I'm helping them. And it's medicine's wonderful, but unfortunately, there's a lot of not wonderful things about medicine too, and you got to be careful. And the unfortunately in our country, the profit margin seems to drive. It's just so coarse in our population to make money, and big pharma has really controlled the purse strings through this.
Definitely.
And hopefully that's about to change. And you don't have to be a part of that, and you just have to find the right practitioner or the right doctor to work with you. And we're out there.
Yes, definitely. I love it. Dr. Brownstein, thank you so much for giving us this wealth of information to pass on to everyone. And I'm sure we'll be back with another topic in the near future. And until then, for everybody, thank you for listening to the Meehan Mission podcast. Please share, especially for people that are maybe on statins or their doctor's recommending them. It's the more knowledge we have and the more that we can pass it around, the stronger that we're going to be and the healthier we're going to be. So everybody take care. Thank you.